Good morning, dear students. Welcome to the another lecture in the Unit 1 of your paper Refining Process of the Crude Oil, the Hydrocarbons in the Petroleum or the Crude Oil. To judge out the quality of the crude oil, it is essential to understand the various types of the hydrocarbons present in the crude oil. As well as we should learn what is the chemistry of the hydrocarbons which are present in the crude oil. So in this lecture we are going to discuss the various types of the hydrocarbons, and then we discuss the chemistry in the another lecture. The outline of the presentation, the review of the previous lecture. What is the objective or the learning outcome of this lecture? The introduction, the various hydrocarbons present in the petroleum or the crude oil. We should discuss in the detail paraffins, olefins, aromatics, naphthalene, naphthalene, the difference between the naphthene and naphthalenes, resins, asphaltenes. There is exercise after finishing the topic, the references and the resources, and SELO. SELO is the student effective learning outcome. So after this lecture, the learning outcome that we have decided, it should be fulfilled. What is the objective or the learning outcome of this lecture? As we all know, the petroleum products are the materials derived from the crude oil, which is a fossil fuel, and it is processed in the oil refineries. The majority of the petroleum is converted to the various petroleum products, the several classes of the fuels generated. So by this lecture, the students will understand the fundamentals of the crude oil hydrocarbons and what is the purpose of refining process in it. So these are the important objective or the learning outcome. We have discussed the origin of the crude oil in the previous lecture, as well as the composition of the crude oil in detail, and we have the classification of the crude oil. So let's understand the hydrocarbons in the petroleum. This is very necessary to understand the elemental composition that is mainly in the crude oil. 84 to 87% by weight carbon is there. 11 to 14% hydrogen. 0 to 3% the sulfur. This is the range. It can vary in this range. 0 to 2% by weight oxygen. 0 to 0.6% nitrogen, and the metals can be ranging from 0 to 100 ppm. Understood? So this is the main elemental composition. Understanding thoroughly the fundamentals of the crude chemistry is very important in the refining process. So as we go for understanding the refining of the crude oil, for this is the basic fundamental understanding required here. So we are studying for the purpose of the refining, as I have told you, that is the learning outcome of this lecture should be the existence of the compounds with the various functional groups and their dominance or the reduction in the various refinery product is what is essentially targeted in the various chemical and the physical processes in the refinery. So to understand the hydrocarbons chemistry, their functional groups, so how much it should be reduced for the application in the refinery process, and how much target we should go for achieving for the removal of that particular compound is very much necessary. Understood? So let's start. The first important category of the hydrocarbon is the paraffins. Why the saturated hydrocarbons are called paraffins? Everybody is knowing the answer. Because it is having the little affinity or the slight affinity towards the general reagent. That's why all the saturated hydrocarbons are called paraffins, and they refer to the alkanes, and we have a homologous series of the alkanes depending on the number of the carbon atoms, and it can be the straight chain or the branch chain, that is normal and isobutane, normal and isopentane, and these compounds are obtained as a gas fraction from the crude distillation unit. We should discuss about the distillation of the crude oil in the next unit, so that you can have this paraffins. Okay. So here are the structural uh, compounds, the paraffins, methane, ethane, and that is, let's start the branching from the number carbon atom 4, that is normal butane, normal pentane, and we have the structural difference, the branch, that is isobutane and isopentane. So the next hydrocarbon is the olefins, having the affinity towards the oil, such as ethylene, propylene, butylenes, which are highly chemically reactive. Understood? So they are not found in the mentionable quantities in the crude oil. So unsaturated hydrocarbons. The next hydrocarbon is the naphthenes, which is also called cycloalkanes. So various type of the cycloalkanes like cyclopropane, this is the 5 ring chain carbon atoms, but it is all the single bonded carbon-carbon or carbon-hydrogen atoms that comes in the category of the saturated. Methyl cyclohexane is also present in the crude oil. And these compounds are not aromatic. They are different from the aromatic compound. That's why they do not contribute much to the octane number. By the octane number only we can judge the quality of the crude oil. We should learn about the octane number and the cetane number, by which we can assess the quality of the gasoline or the quality of the diesel. Therefore, in reforming reaction, these compounds are targeted to generate aromatics which have the higher octane numbers than the naphthenes. So, to increase the aromatic content, if we want, then we can have such a reaction, reforming reactions, to increase the aromatic content by these cycloalkanes. So the aromatic compounds producing the aroma or the fragrance, the benzene related compounds. So the benzene, toluene, ortho, meta, para, xylene, they are available in the crude oil. Here you can see the benzene is the principal aromatic compound, and we have the derivatives, the toluene and the xylene. This is the para-xylene. You can have the para position, the methyl group is there. So these are available in the crude oil, okay, and these contributes towards the higher octane number products, and target is to maximize their quantity in the refinery because it is having the anti-knocking properties, and because of that the increase in the aromatic compounds can be done by various reactions. We have earlier talked about the reforming. So there is an increase in the aromatic content by such of the reaction, which can have the better characteristics, better anti-knocking characteristics, which is required in the crude oil. Okay, so it is the aromatic compounds are very important in the crude oil. So to maximize these compounds for the better quality of the crude oil is very much required. So the polynuclear aromatics are the naphthalenes, and which consist of the 2 or 3 or even more aromatic rings. Their molecular weight is usually between 150 to 500 grams. So if we compare, and these are present in the crude oil with the appropriate proportion, but its proportion causes the various drawbacks because it causes the blockage of the pipes where we go for using in the application purpose. So it causes the blockage of the pies, it condensed out, so their proportion should be less. For that we have to remove the naphthalene content. So other than the hydrocarbons, if we talk about the compound, that is organosulfur compounds, and for example the thiophene, pyridine, they also exist in the crude oil. But the main difficulty of these organosulfur compounds, it is the additional requirements are there for their removal in the such applications like hydrotreaters to meet their standards. Therefore, the operating conditions of these hydrotreaters, it's significantly intense when compared to those that do not target the reduction of the concentration of the organosulfur compounds. So we have to differentiate whether the crude oil is having how much sulfur content or organosulfur compounds in the form of thiophene or the pyridine, so that if we have the specific removal of these compounds, because these compounds require the additional treatment for the removal. So we should have that difference. If the compound is mainly focusing to remove this organosulfur compounds, that should be treated different from those which are not, and the reduction in the concentration is not required there. So that is most important thing to be done in the removal of such compounds. Therefore, ever-growing environmental legislations indicate the technology or the process development improvement on the processing of the organosulfur compounds. Two bad odor compounds, so their removal of it should require the different place, different segment, different requirements. Even the modifications and more technology is still required for such a processing of these compounds. So the next is the oxygen containing compounds, and these compounds do not exist 2% by weight in the crude oil, and typically they are the acetic acids, benzoic acids. These compounds can cause the corrosion, and it is therefore needs to be effectively handled. So again, an important drawback is there for the refining process. Such kind of the oxygen compounds is undesirable because they are responsible for the corrosion. So this is also the main focusing compounds to remove. The next compound is the resins. What are resins? Resins are the polynuclear aromatic structures supported with the side chains of the saturated hydrocarbon, that is paraffins, with the small ring aromatics. Their molecular weights vary from 500 to 1500. So they are the high molecular weight polynuclear aromatic compounds with the side chain of the saturated hydrocarbons. They also contain the various non-metals and the metals like sulfur, nitrogen, oxygen, vanadium and nickel. Such kind of the elements are also there in the non-metals and the metals, and the percentage of the resin in the crude oil is undesirable for some of the application, in which one of the important application is from the coal to the coke production. So the coke is the secondary fuel which is produced by the primary fuel coal. So for that production, it is highly undesirable, the resin content. The next compound is the asphaltenes. Asphaltenes are also the polynuclear aromatic structures. It consists of 20 or more aromatic rings along with the paraffinic and naphthenic chains. A crude oil with a high quantity of the resins and the asphaltenes is called the heavy crude oil, because they all are the higher molecular weight polynuclear aromatic compounds. So if their percentage is higher, it is to be said as the heavy crude. Okay. So with a high quantity of both the resins and the asphaltenes, it is highly undesirable for the application. I have told you earlier for the resin. So for the resin and asphaltenes, it is usually targeted for the coke production. Understood? So whenever crude oil is going to be used in the application, the resins, the heavy crude, including the high proportion of the resins and the asphaltenes, it is to be removed in the refining process. So that is also understand, like organosulfur compounds, the oxygen containing compounds, the high molecular weight compounds. So these all are to be targeted in the refining process, and those compounds which is highly desirable to increase the quality of the crude oil, and that should also be seen, that how we can enhance, how we can increase that content or that compounds, that is also be done in the process. So to understand each one of the type of the hydrocarbons, including the other compounds which are to be used in the refining process, that should be clear of. Understood? So these are the questions you have to solve as you have read all type of the hydrocarbons, including the other compounds and its important applications. So solve these questions, okay? So these are the references or the resources for the paper, the textbook on the petrochemicals, and the references are there. You can have the reference for this paper as well as for the topic. This is the student effective learning outcome, SELO. So as we have discussed the topic, what is the student effective learning outcome? The application of the concepts of the topic which we have discussed about the hydrocarbons in the petroleum or the crude oil. So here the main learning outcome to understand the hydrocarbons in the crude oil is application where they required for the crude oil. It should be removed if we do not have the idea of which kind of the compound having which properties. So on the basis of that, it is a specific learning outcome required for this topic. So it is a effective learning outcome. You should learn about the hydrocarbon concept which is required for the application. And the second one is the adapting thinking skills. So keep thinking as we have discussed about the various type of the saturated, unsaturated, aromatic compounds which should be judged out with its quality of the crude oil. Understood? So keep going on thinking of all these aspects we have discussed. So these are the two effective learning outcome of this lecture. In the next lecture, we should discuss each one of the hydrocarbon chemistry or the main reactivity, the main properties of each one of the compound we should know, because in the amount, in the proportion, how it can have the properties in the crude oil, that we should discuss in the next lecture. Okay, so till then you have your all the two lectures we have discussed it about the origin of the crude oil with the major composition and the classification, including all the hydrocarbons present in the crude oil. Understood? So keep going and keep reminding this main fundamentals of the crude oil. Understood? So whenever the question is asked, the crude oil, you have in your mind, yes, the saturated paraffins, the olefins, the aromatics, naphthenes, naphthalenes, resins, asphaltenes, toxin compounds. So you have all the certain compounds examples in your mind. Be sure. Okay, so that is the main purpose. So first you have to prepare with all certain points. Understood? So keep going and keep learning. We will meet in the next lecture. Thank you and take care.